All right, once again, good evening, everyone. I'm Dennis Stone from the Center for Advocacy and Social Justice. And tonight we have a special guest, Kaya Hill. She is a Bachelor of Science student at Ball State University in the College of Communication, Information, and Media. And most importantly for us, she has minored in History and African American Studies and is a young African American who will share her experience, as we often do in these meetings, and then open it up for dialogue. We're going to record her presentation, and then we'll shut the recording off for the dialogue. You may want to add more to your introduction, Kaya. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight to have this conversation. Just to echo what Dennis said, yeah, my name is Kaya. I am a senior at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana, small town. I'm a communication major in interpersonal communication, so I focus on one-to-one conversations and how to develop those into long-lasting relationships. I am an intern for the Urban League in the Center at Advocacy and Social Justice. This is my first semester interning. I'm loving it so far. It's been such a great experience. And I am really excited to be here with you guys tonight and to kind of share my story a bit, and really thankful for the opportunity and that you guys are here to listen and to dialogue once we get to that point. I'm mostly just tonight going to share with you my experience growing up and just kind of tell you my story and the ways I've encountered race at different times in my life. And that take maybe 20 minutes, probably not. I probably won't talk for a super long amount of time, and then we can open it up for dialogue. So to begin, something you should know about me is that I am very much proud of where I am today and where I stand today in my just journey with accepting my own race and who I am, because that journey was not easy. I grew up in a very small town in Indiana called Brownsburg, and it was quite the opposite of Brown. It was a very, very much predominantly white community that I grew up in. And growing up in that area, I wasn't necessarily introduced to Blackness in the ways that some young Black people are introduced to their Blackness. And another factor that kind of played into that was that I grew up in a very religious household. And my identity was centered in things that were not my race, but in more things like religion. And so I was taught growing up that your skin color doesn't necessarily matter really in any situation. What matters is, putting your faith in something bigger and being a part of something bigger than you. And I was okay with that for a really long time. I was okay with not necessarily taking on the implications of being a young Black person. I didn't see the treatment that was going on in the wider sense of the media, and I didn't see the trends of African Americans and the disproportionate policing and jailing and imprisonment and incarceration of the people who looked like me. I just didn't understand that for a really long time, and I accepted that. And I went through my life as just a person, not a Black person or a this person or a that person, but just a person. And growing up and going to school, most of my friends were white, and so they helped me kind of be just a person, as they didn't necessarily see or recognize me as a person of color. And my school that I went to didn't do much to, encourage pride in that sense, in racial sense. And I had some really interesting experiences that I look back on and I think, I should have been a bit of a red flag, or maybe I should have talked to somebody about that. And I would like to share just a couple of those instances with you today. In middle school, I had a pretty big group of white friends who loved to hang out on the weekends, as friends do. And I would always go over there, and I was always the only Black person there. And that was okay with me, because at that time I wasn't a Black person, I was just a person. And we would play this game where we would sit in a room and then someone would shut off the lights really quickly and everybody would like disperse and hide. And then we'd turn on the lights and everybody would try to be found. And every time the lights would go off, whenever we would play this game, everyone would simultaneously chime in and say, where's Kaya? Where'd Kaya go? Because the lights were off and I was dark and they weren't. And I laughed along. I thought it was funny. I thought it was cute. I thought it was great to be the center of attention, even if that meant it was just kind of an odd situation for me. And so I went along with it and I accepted it and I kept those friends and I kept moving on. And it's not like it did any like considerable damage to me as a person. But now looking back on it, I think, in a situation like that, being who I am today, who I am now, how would I have reacted to that differently or responded to that differently? And then moving into high school, I began to kind of understand that I was a little bit confused about what it meant to be Black, because a lot of my friends, and at this time, a lot more Black students were coming into Brownsburg schools, and they were talking about these movies and these artists that they're like, Kaya, you've never seen Medea? Kaya, you've never seen Coming to America? You've never seen the classic Black films? And I had never seen them. I never watched them. They weren't a part of my childhood. You don't listen to rap like that. You don't listen to Kendrick Lamar. You don't listen to these very influential, Black rappers in our generation. And I was like, I don't. I'm not introduced to it at home. And my mom taught me to believe that it was, not necessarily good music and that I shouldn't be listening to that and I should invest in different things. And, and it just wasn't central to my identity, to my personality. And I began to feel really left out by a lot of the students in my school because it was the classic, the Black kids didn't think I was Black enough and the white kids began to see me as a little too Black for them. And it got to a point where it started to definitely affect my high school experience. I was very heavily involved in show choir, and show choir is a very interesting sport, if you want to call it that. A lot of people, there's a lot of disagreement there. Me personally, being an athlete and in show choir, I'd say we have the heart of athletes, but I wouldn't call it a sport. That's just my personal opinion. But in show choir, I was exposed to a lot of just situations in which I was reminded that being Black really does have implications in the real world, and that my identity in religion, it was fine, but that there's also other identities that I should acknowledge and other identities that I can grow in and that I can be proud of. One of the first instances was our body tights. So in show choir, you have to wear a full suit of body tight material that's like spandex all over your body so that we can quick change and do whatever we need to do backstage so that we can put on the show and in the front of the stage. A lot of times the bottom half of your body tights are showing, so like below the knee or maybe just a little bit above the knee to the ankles is showing on stage because we're wearing dresses or skirts. And there were about 4 or 5 maybe Black girls in the show choir at this time, and we all wore the same colored body tights. The white girls, the Black girls, the mixed girls, we all wore the same colored body tights. And so on stage, the 5 Black girls stood out a whole lot because their skin on top was dark and the body tights over their legs was white. And so it was just a really uncomfortable situation because everybody would say like, oh, you got a half and half situation going on there, or this and that. And that was extremely uncomfortable. Another instance was I was the dance captain and I was often chosen for dance solos. And there was one point where it was 4 Black girls who were in the solo and then 1 non-Black person who was in the solo. And one of the directors from another school who was watching our performance said, it's like reverse affirmative action. You got to make sure there's 1 white girl in there, huh? And having sat there and hearing that, it was just weird to me, as I was not introduced, I'm not aware of terms like affirmative action or even racial things that I didn't even know if it was offensive or if it was just supposed to be a joke that I was to laugh at. I had no idea. And just finally within the realm of show choir, we were all forced to have our hair to be uniform. And if you know anything about Black hair versus white hair, it is very much different. And when you're the minority in a group, you're going to most likely conform to the majority, and that's what we were expected to do. And I went through 4 years of hair damage, conforming to the styles of hair that we had to wear in show choir, which weren't cute on anyone and should have been changed a long time ago. But we decided to go with the 50s style bump in the front and ponytail in the back. And it's just not a good look on anyone that we were doing that for. And so it was a very odd experience to kind of be put in a situation where you were constantly uncomfortable because people were pointing out that you were different. And I think that it would have been a much different experience for me had I been introduced to my Blackness before that point. And then kind of just transitioning from high school to college, a lot happened between my junior year of high school and my freshman year of college. A lot happened to where I was able to kind of break away from the religious hold my mother had on me in the home. She ended up actually asking me to leave the home, asking me to not return, and that was in response to my coming out as gay to her. And as a result of that kind of situation, I lived in my car for 2 years, in and out of people's homes. I couch hopped. I did what I could. I worked 2 jobs, and I was 17 at the time when this happened. And I never found necessarily stable housing during that time. And we know that when you first separate from your parents, you're kind of like introduced to a whole new world where you think everything's like so different. And you're like, wow, my parents know nothing. This is what the real world is. I got that introduction at 17, being out on my own. And I was able to kind of see what I had not been seeing before due to my religion being the number one thing on my mind, and then my number one most forefront identity. And once I was exposed to those things, I never stopped seeing them. It's like when you get a new car and you're driving your new car for the first time, and then every time after you drive that car, you see your car everywhere, like everyone's driving your car, and you feel like a trendsetter. That's exactly what it felt like when I left the house. When I first started seeing injustices, and that had racial implications, I started seeing them everywhere. And it was a scary and heartbreaking and eye-opening experience to be on my own as a gay Black woman and experiencing all of these racial things going on in our country that were creating so much heat. And then it came to be about 2020, and I was 2 years or so into being on my own. I'm now in college, a freshman in college. I'm starting my sophomore year, and the news of George Floyd comes out. And I remember thinking to myself, this can't just be another situation. I have been hearing about these situations and where an unarmed Black man is killed by the police. And I've been hearing about this since Trayvon Martin, and I think I was in 4th or 5th grade when Trayvon Martin was killed. And so very young in my schooling age, I learned of these just horrors, but I didn't see them as that because my mom and people would always tell me, well, he charged the police, or well, he did this, he did that. We gotta, take into account that police officers want to go home at the end of the day too, which is a completely valid point. But in my young age, that kind of led me to believe that it didn't matter that I was Black. It matters that I am religious. It matters that I have my faith in this thing. And then I went away from home and my ideology completely flipped. And after the events of George Floyd is when I really began to take advocacy work very seriously. I started to bring it into the Ball State Communication Department, where we study identity and how identity affects people. We study that very intensely in our department. And I began to bring up questions like, if we're going to study identity, then why aren't we studying intersectional identities and how they affect one another? And why aren't we studying privilege, which is inherent of identity because your identities, grant you privileges? And why aren't we studying this? And why aren't we studying that? Well, is there space to talk about anti-racism in this time? Is there space to talk about this? Would it be comfortable for you if I helped you lead this discussion so that we can be more productive? I see that you're hesitant to lead these conversations, and I would be more than happy to do so. I would like to produce, productive conversations in the classroom. And just little by little, class by class, I began to change things a little bit. And by my junior year, I was teaching 150 students chapters out of Ijeoma Oluo's So You Want to Talk About Race. And I was telling my peers why it's not okay to touch a Black woman's hair, to touch a Black person's hair. I was teaching my white peers, the difference between saying, well, I'm not racist, and being actively anti-racist. I was talking about tone policing and the differences between prejudice and racism. And I was seeing, real change happening on our campus. And then we had an incident on our own campus where a young student had the police called on him because he wanted to sit in the back of the classroom to charge his laptop. And the police had him drag him out of the classroom and was not allowed to return. And we had a walkout on campus that same week. And people started to turn to myself and the organization I'm a part of on campus and say, hey, what are we going to do about this? We need to do something. And that is where kind of my just passion for advocacy and for this work came into. I would say that now, just being a part of the Urban League and being able to do research and to work on projects and to even utilize social media in really impactful ways has been such an amazing opportunity for me in helping me understand that just because I didn't necessarily grow up Black, I wasn't the, my Blackness wasn't as developed as some people get to experience when they're younger. And I kind of had to figure it out for myself and define for myself what my Blackness means to me. And doing this kind of work just every day reminds me of how important that journey is and how really incredible it is that, we come from all different walks of life and all different experiences, and we come and we can unite over, this one thing that is advocating for people who can't always advocate for themselves. And I often think about the younger version of myself who would have allowed someone to call me an N-word on the N-word on the basketball court, and would have allowed people to make racist jokes, and would have allowed people to just treat me like my Blackness has no meaning and it has no implications. I would say to her, stand up. And stand up for yourself and question things, ask those questions that you want to ask, like, hey, what do you mean by that? Why are you calling me these terms? Where did you, come to think that was appropriate? And if I had the tools to advocate for myself, then I would have. And I now just really want to dedicate my life and my work to helping students and people find those tools to advocate for themselves, the ones that I wasn't able to have. And I just think I'll close with this. One of the most impactful things I feel that I've done in this work is at my old high school now, they do not require you to wear a graduation cap if you do not want to wear a cap. And this was a huge debate that went on my senior year because I used to have big curly hair, and the caps for graduation day wouldn't fit on my head. And I told them I was not straightening my hair. I'm not doing anything that's out of the norm because I shouldn't have to. I shouldn't have to conform. I shouldn't have to change my appearance. I should be able to feel confident and feel, like a way that I want to present myself when I walk across that stage. And at the moment, unfortunately, they didn't necessarily hear me out, and I was asked to wear a cap. And so I stayed up the night before graduation and glued a headband onto the cap and wore it as a headband. instead of on my head, and they tried to get me to take it off and to put it on correctly. And I was telling them I literally physically cannot fit this cap on my head. I already have kind of a big forehead, and when my hair is all out, it doesn't work. It wouldn't stay on there. And I threw my cap down in protest and walked across the stage, and now they allow it. And so I try to remind myself that small actions and standing up for yourself can do a lot more than you think it can. And I think that would just kind of be the theme and the lesson of where I've come so far in just my 21 years of life, is that when you start advocating for yourself, you can advocate for others. And I've really had a really good experience coming to terms with that and just embracing my Blackness and being very, very much proud in it. And I hope to continue to inspire that in others. And yeah, I just thank you all for listening. I appreciate your attention, your attentiveness. I would like to open up for dialogue, for questions, and for anything anyone wants to talk about. I think you're muted, Dennis.
Thank you. I did have one question. I want to thank you, first of all, for sharing your story. It's unfortunately, we don't have younger people on our conversations as often as we should. And it's great to have you here and learn about your story. But you also, I think it's informed your focus on your scholarship and your interest in critical race theory. I thought maybe you could share a little bit of that, perhaps your focus on it, how you see it, and how you want to develop that scholarship.
Yeah, absolutely. So my interest in critical race theory, I love theory in general. It's part of being a Cobb major. We do a lot of theory because communication is all theorized. We can't say exactly why someone says what they say, but we can get a pretty good idea of why. When I started to look into critical race theory, and that I didn't start to until it became pretty prominent in the media, because I just had never heard of it before. And then it came into the media. And so I said, let me dive into this and see what it's really about. My town met critical race theory with immense backlash, Brownsburg did. And that was really disheartening to me when I got into reading it, because I thought, well, number one, this is legal scholarship. So I'm pretty sure that the word for word theory isn't going to be seen in our elementary school textbooks, because that wouldn't be really productive for anyone. But when you take a look at those tenets and the ideas that are presented there, what it really is correcting history. And I am a huge advocate for that. And when I was in my junior year of high school, I took AP US History because I thought that it would be the best way to really get a full grasp on, truthfully, the civil rights movement and just the history of Black people in general. I thought, what a better way to do that than to be a part of an accelerated course, one that really dives into the material. And then I was very, very sadly disappointed when we spent, I believe it was 2 days, maybe a class and a half, on the civil rights movement. And that was just a video of of Bloody Sunday that we watched, a YouTube video leading up to Bloody Sunday. That was that was all we got for the civil rights movement. And I kid you not, when the video ended and we had finished our reflection paper and the bell was about to ring and the teacher said, okay, when you come back tomorrow, we're going to jump into Elvis, and literally going, first of all, back in time a little bit, and second of all, just completely disregarding all the other elements of the civil rights movement. I sat there with my jaw dropped. My jaw was on my desk. I was shocked that we had reduced such an impactful movement to a class and a half and just a video and a reflection assignment. And so when I got into looking at critical race theory, and I saw that we're looking at interest convergence and the idea that civil rights, activism and civil rights legislation was being met with a very slow process of reform, and that was due to some of these things that we never talk about that were historically bound, like the Cold War and how it put America on a pedestal, and how many Americans were thinking, well, how do we show the world that we are against all the things that they're saying while still subjugating an entire race of people strictly based on their skin color? And they said, oh, let's do this. Let's desegregate the schools. Let's integrate. Let's reverse the laws that have segregation in place. And then Brown versus Board was introduced and was passed, right? And so that's kind of the biggest part of critical race theory is or the biggest part of interest convergence theory is Brown versus Board. And I found that really interesting. And I thought, why aren't we talking about this? Why aren't we informed about the decisions that are being made and why they're being made? And I think critical race theory in schools is a great idea. And I think if it's done and if it's formed for education, you won't even know it's there. It'll be discussions that you won't even realize are changing the way you think about things. And I think that is so important, because the way we are brought up in our education system and the way that our history is taught is incredibly damaging to societies and to our idea of race. And I happen to believe it's very much intentional. The people who create this knowledge and who write our textbooks, who fund our textbooks, are very much in the mindset of keeping things the way they are. And so I think critical race theory is the next step, the biggest step in introducing that into schools is what we should really do in order to kind of take that first step towards combating systemic racism. And yeah, that I've just been introduced into that scholarship just a little bit, and I've started to research it more, and I hope to produce a paper pretty soon on interest convergence theory and the current state of American politics and how it is still kind of at play today.
Thank you very much. Morgan or William, do you have questions for Kaya?
I'd be interested in knowing what you think your career might be after you're through with school.
Yeah, that's a great question. I right now am hoping to go into diversity, equity, and inclusion work somewhere in the education field. I like to work in education. However, this internship has really opened my eyes to a lot of the other things that I can do. I'm open to anything as long as I'm helping people, truthfully. That's really what I want to do, is just be an advocate for people that can't be an advocate for themselves all the time. And so I think that diversity, equity, and inclusion work would be a good step for me. I also thought about going to graduate school for a little bit and just kind of entering the field of communication, which is an extremely important field when it comes to combating issues of race, because language is developed, by the people in power, and the language that we use is so incredibly specific and so important to make sure that we're using correct terminology and the way that we communicate with people. And so I thought that I could maybe go into that field and do some scholarship in that area as well. But yeah, DEI and just any kind of advocacy work.
Sounds exciting.
Mr. White, maybe you could share with us your background, and perhaps you have a question or want to share your own experience.
I guess it's a little bit of all the above. Again, my name is Morgan White, and I'm from Goose Creek, South Carolina. Originally from Holly Hill, South Carolina, which is a small town such as yourself, Kaya. And just a little bit on my background. When I grew up, there were segregated schools. Now, keep in mind, I'm 56 years old. So I had a part of the racist things in the 60s. However, my elementary school, middle school, and first year of high school, segregated, all Black. My second year of high school, they integrated the white high school and the Black high school. And the thing I've learned, it wasn't so much as me being racist, but being taught to be racist or afraid of the other skin color. And as I grew up, and then I graduated and joined the military, which whereas that racism thing went away. It was you're no longer black or white, you're green. I went to Marine Corps, so you're green. You have to throw away that racist stuff because if you're in a foxhole, doesn't matter what color you are, you got to provide and fight for your brother. But now that I'm retired with my church program, I am with the Disciples of Christ in South Carolina. Well, I'm also on a Push to Purpose team, which has been tasked with dealing with anti-racism and reconciling. So we've got 38 congregations that we have to introduce and put this in. I think 17 are white congregations, the rest are black. And then we're having a difficult time learning how to worship together. We, in fact, have two churches, one's black, one's white. They worship in the same building, same time, different parts of the building. Mm. And they're going to be my project or my model to say, here's how we're going to get along. Sure, because they're working together great, but they did not actually, intertwine or join to say, okay, we are one church, not this one or that one, because that one's black and that one's white. But however, they're acting that way, but they get along and interact great, but just will not worship together. So what I'm doing as joining you guys tonight is doing some research as what are the things that are being talked about, racism, anti-racism, reconciling, all these things. So when we have meetings or have discussions, I'll have some information outside of us to share, or I can see what else is being done to make this thing work with the racism. So that's a little bit about me. And there was a few notes I took down as you spoke, Kaya, like the police and the wrongful killings. And I thought about that when I was seeing, like you said, the George Floyd, the Breonna Taylor, the other killings, and even some in our in our area, because there was one killing in Charleston a while back. And I looked at it and I started researching. And I said, well, let me get a little bit more information on the circumstances. And what I found is it wasn't just the blacks, but the black incidents were more prominent and brought about and talked about. But there were also other races that were being done somewhat the same way. And I just kind of looked at all of the reports and dug in a little deeper. And it was mostly that the defendants or the people that were killed did the initial wrong, but because of the action, the police did the ultimate wrong by taking their lives. And I said, well, that's a double-edged sword. I mean, you can't say, yeah, they're wrong, but there are instances where the police are afraid and they immediately go too far to the right. And that's due because of the actions that has happened in the past. And the other thing to talk about religion versus identity. That is a very, very strong thing with a lot of young people today and a lot of old people today. And like you said, if you're brought up in a household where it's constantly preached religion, 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 you're not your own, you're this. So you may not see your blackness or your whiteness, or you see as Christ. But you have to realize or remember, yes, I'm one with Christ, but I live in this world of man. So I have to understand where do I say, okay, well, here I have to not necessarily put my religion down, but rely on that faith to make me make the right decision and be who I am, according to Christ. So, and that's where you got your religion versus your identity. And a lot of people get it. I'm holier than thou, and all they see is the religion stuff, not their own personal identity. So I kind of agree with you as to when you got of age and realize, okay, well, I've been sheltered from this, now I'm exposed to this. Well, who am I really? And again, and I preach this all the well, I can't say I preach because I'm not a preacher, but in any case, I constantly remind folks when we have meetings, we are going to have uncomfortable conversation when it comes to race. Because there's a book that I was reading, and it's called Anxious to Talk About It by Carolyn B. Hessel. I'm pretty sure you guys probably heard of it. Maybe not, in any case. Here's what it is. And it is very, very informational. Very informational. And it gives a lot of good information. So I use a lot of stuff, and I've highlighted a bunch of stuff when we have conversations. And I've in fact had all the people on our team to read it. So when we do have, let's say, an informational sharing with the different congregations, there's a part of this book that we share, whatever it is that's going to fit that particular meeting, because we're going to have an uncomfortable conversation. And some folks are going to come with a personal agenda versus a church agenda, which is fine, but you have to happily meter the two, because we are here in a church setting to discuss personal interactions based on race. So again, like I said, it's a lot of things that I could go on and on about, but those are just some of the things about me and what I'm right now into and try to help with. And like I said, I looked at some other books that's on anti-racism, which I've yet to read, but I've got this one right here, which has got my attention for the longest. And then the critical race theory you talked about. I'd like to somehow, whenever you finish your paper, somehow get a hold of it to actually use that as a tool to share with the people. Because I think you're off to a very good start and you have a whole lot of good information to share. Well, in case that's my spill and everything. And I thank you guys for listening. Okay.
Morgan, you say you're 66?
56, not 66.
56. Okay.
That's 10 years down the road.
Awful young to me, so I was trying to put that together.
No, 5'6", not 6'6".
Okay,
I was born in 66, but I'm not 66 yet.
Good.
Excuse me, a little
that title one more
weird,
time.
but I've
I
had a
didn't
long
write
day.
it down. I'm sorry.
Say again.
The title of that book.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll put it up again. Hopefully you guys can see
Okay,
it.
got it this time. Thank you.
All right, and I'll put it up to where you can see the author's name.
I got it.
Got it?
Yeah.
And again, like I said, it is very, very informational. Very, very informational. And I'll just read some of what, well, I'll tell you what, I'll just share some of the things that it talks about. And it says, helping white Christians talk faithfully about racism. And it has several chapters, talks about white, and well, here's the one thing that got my attention. When you have a conversation and you say, we're going to talk about race, everyone's temperature goes up a notch because you become anxious because you don't know what's going to be said and what's going to be offensive or not offensive. When we talk about race, everything seems to be offensive. And the thing that that a lot of people, well, part of the book, it says white people are racist. So do you believe that? You feel that way? Just think about that question a minute. White people are racist. How do you feel? Do you believe that? You think that? Or that's been proven or shown or known? Well, initially, yes, because back in the olden days, that's what they were taught, that they were a better race of people. But that is a taught behavior. Because when you're born, you have the innate sense of knowing right from wrong, whether you believe it or not, but you do. So this book has given me a lot of insight as to how to have a conversation about it, how to lead into a conversation, and just allow people to talk and truly give their thoughts on what it is. And then we get into a conversation to just, dissect what it is that makes you think that way or feel that way or believe that way. And like I said, it says, introduction, white and anxious, chapter 1, the way we think about race, chapter 2, feeling white, chapter 3, mapping racial identity development. And that's a pretty good one. Then 4, listening to different stories about race. That's a good one too. And expressing gratitude. When I read, I said, express gratitude about racism? Really? How do you do that? Doesn't make any sense. But if you read it, you'll get the better understanding of what it's saying to do that. And it's meaning to understand, accept, and appreciate a person's thought about racism. Be it right, wrong, and different, whether you agree with it or not, you have to understand and accept and appreciate their thoughts on that and their behavior. Now, whether you can change that, that's truly up to your discussion. That is left up to your discussion as to what you guys talk about. And then chapter 6, spiritual practices for race talk. And then there's the anxious bench. And then it goes into the recommended resources. So there's a lot of good things in this book that, and again, like I said, the initial reading of the book, white and anxious, and then you think, well, why aren't white people being mentioned in the racism? Because in the beginning, they were the the majority of those folks were the ones that introduced and projected the racism. So we all have to learn and accept our portion of what we allowed it to be or what it became. And now how do we diffuse or dissect that and make it, oh, well, you can't make it okay, but you have to realize that some people are just never going to change, regardless of what you say or don't say, and regardless of what you let them say or don't say. So that's just.
I just wanted to interject. I'm going to stop the recording. I promised that we would do that. I'm glad we picked up what you had to say, though, because I'm sure people that view this video will be very interested in that. But I'm going to stop it right now.
Okay.
And thank you, Mr. White and Kaya. And we're going to just go into a off-the-record dialogue.
Okay.